I never imagined that my family could just disappear from my life. Not like that. Not in the way they did, but 6 years ago, they ghosted me. It was as if one day they existed and the next they didn't. No fights, no real signs of trouble, nothing, just silence. I spent months trying to figure out what went wrong, what I did wrong. I remember the day everything changed. It was a Sunday. Sundays were always special in my family. We used to gather at my parents' house for a big lunch. It was a tradition, a one I never thought would be broken. That Sunday, I arrived with a bottle of wine, expecting the usual noise and laughter. But when I knocked on the door, there was no answer. I thought maybe they were running late, so I waited. I called, texted, even rang the doorbell again. Nothing. The house was dark and quiet. I went around to the back, trying to see if anyone was home, but it was clear. The place was empty. I figured something must have come up, an emergency, maybe. So I left a voicemail, something like, "Hey, I'm here, just wondering where everyone is. Hope everything's okay. Call me when you get a chance." No one ever did. At first, I wasn't too worried. Life happens, right? People get busy, and maybe something unexpected had happened. But after a week of silence, my concern grew. I kept calling, texting, even stopping by, but my messages went unanswered, and their house stayed dark. It felt so unreal, like something out of a bad dream. I tried reaching out to my siblings and no response. It wasn't just my parents who had ghosted me, it was everyone. Every single person in my family had cut me off, and I had no idea why. For months, I went over every interaction I had with them, trying to pinpoint where things had gone wrong. Did I say something to offend them? Was there some underlying issue I had missed? I was driving myself crazy trying to figure it out. I even reached out to mutual friends, people who might know if something had happened. But no one had any answers. In fact, some of my friends had heard from my family, but they all claimed that nothing seemed off. They said they hadn't mentioned me, and I felt too embarrassed to ask if my family had said something about why they were avoiding me. I spiraled into a deep depression. How could they just cut me off? I went from having a family to being utterly alone. The worst part was not knowing why. The silence was unbearable, and it drove me to a point where I started questioning everything about myself. Was I not a good daughter, sister? Had I been selfish or unkind without realizing it? It ate away at me day and night. Months turned into a year, then another. I still couldn't make sense of it. I threw myself into work, trying to bury the hurt. I didn't talk about it much. How could I? It felt humiliating to admit that my family had ghosted me. I came up with excuses when friends would ask why I didn't visit home for holidays or why I didn't talk about my parents anymore. It was easier to pretend that everything was fine than to explain what had happened, because, honestly, I didn't even know what had happened. By the third year, I started accepting that they weren't coming back. It was an incredibly painful realization, but I couldn't live in limbo forever. I couldn't keep waiting for calls that never came or texts that remained unread. I tried to move on. I made new friends, found hobbies to occupy my time, and even went to therapy. Therapy helped, but the pain never fully went away. It just became something I learned to live with. Year 4 came and went in a blur. Life went on, and I was learning how to navigate a world without them in it. Some days were harder than others. I would see families together at the park or out shopping, and I'd feel a pang of sadness. I'd wonder if my family thought about me at all. Did they miss me? Did they ever feel guilty for cutting me off like that? By the 5th year, I was in a better place emotionally. I had started dating again, something I hadn't done in years. I was hesitant to get too close to anyone, though. I think a part of me was still afraid of being abandoned again, but it felt good to let someone in, even just a little. Life wasn't perfect, but it was getting better. The wound was still there, but it wasn't as raw as it had been in those early years. And then, out of the blue, they called. After 6 years of silence, my mother's name flashed on my phone screen. I was so shocked I almost didn't pick up. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the phone. It was surreal. After all that time, I thought maybe I had imagined it. But no, it was real. My mother was calling me. I hesitated for a moment before answering. When I did, her voice was calm, almost casual, as if we had just spoken the day before. "Hi," she said. "It's been a while. How have you been?" How had I been? How had I been? It felt like an absurd question after everything. I didn't even know how to respond. I stammered something, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been a broken bar." "Fine. How a broken bar? How are you?" There was a long pause on her end, and then she said, "We've been thinking about you. We'd love for you to come back home. You know, a broken bar, visit us. It's been too long." Too long? I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell and ask her how she could say something like that so casually, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed quiet for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why are you calling me now, after 6 years?" There was another long pause, and I could hear her shifting uncomfortably. "It's a broken bar, complicated," she said. "But we've missed you. We're ready to move forward." Move forward? As if those 6 years of silence could just be brushed under the rug? As if they hadn't left me in the dark, wondering what I had done wrong for all that time? I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest, but I swallowed it. I had waited 6 years to hear from them, and now that they were reaching out, I didn't want to ruin the chance to get answers. I took a deep breath and asked the question that had been haunting me for years. "Why did you ghost me? Why did you cut me off like that?" There was a long silence. Then she sighed. "It's a broken bar, not something I can explain over the phone. Can we meet in person? It would be better if we talked face to face." I felt conflicted. Part of me wanted to hang up and never speak to them again, but another part of me, the part that had been yearning for answers, knew I had to see them. I needed closure, even if I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever explanation they had to offer. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Let's meet." We agreed to meet at my parents' house the following weekend. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with anxiety. I had no idea what to expect. Were they going to apologize, explain why they had abandoned me, or would it be some bizarre attempt to pretend like nothing had ever happened? The day of the meeting arrived, and I found myself standing in front of the same house I had stood outside of 6 years ago. This time, the house wasn't dark and empty. The lights were on, and I could hear voices inside. I hesitated before ringing the doorbell, my heart pounding in my chest. After a moment, the door opened, and there they were, my parents, my siblings, all standing there, smiling as if they hadn't been missing from my life for the better part of a decade. "Come in," my mother said, stepping aside to let me in. Her voice was warm, inviting, as if I had just come over for a casual visit. I stepped inside, feeling a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, and a strange sense of relief. It felt surreal to be back in that house, surrounded by people who had once meant everything to me. But the warmth I had once felt in their presence was gone. In its place was a coldness, a distance that hadn't been there before. We sat down in the living room, and I waited for someone to speak, to explain why they had disappeared from my life for so long. But instead, my mother started with small talk, asking me about work, my life, what I had been up to all these years. I answered her questions robotically, my mind racing as I waited for the real conversation to start. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I couldn't take it anymore. "Why did you ghost me?" I blurted out, my voice trembling with emotion. "Why did you all just disappear from my life without a word?" The room fell silent. My mother glanced at my father, who looked down at the floor, avoiding my gaze. My siblings shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one wanted to answer the question, but I wasn't going to let them avoid it any longer. My mother finally spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. "It wasn't an easy decision," she said. "But at the time, we felt like it was the right thing to do." "The right thing to do?" I repeated, incredulous. "You thought cutting me off without any explanation was the right thing to do?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "There were things happening at Broken Bar, things you didn't know about. We didn't want to burden you with them." "Burden me?" I said, my voice rising. "You didn't give me a choice. You just left me. I've spent 6 years wondering what I did wrong, wondering why my own family didn't want me in their lives." My father finally spoke, his voice low and filled with regret. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong. We Broken Bar, we just thought it would be best if we handled things on our own." "What things?" I asked, my frustration mounting. What could have been so bad that you thought it was better to shut me out completely? There was another long pause, and I could see the tension in the room. My siblings exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. My mother took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for what she was about to say. We were going through a lot of broken bar family issues, she began. Financial problems, health scare as a broken bar, things we didn't want to worry you with. We thought it would be easier if you didn't have to deal with it. I stared at her in disbelief. Easier for who? I asked, because it certainly wasn't easier for me. Do you have any idea what it's been like, not knowing why my family abandoned me, not knowing if you were alive or dead? My mother looked pained, but she didn't say anything. My father spoke again. We thought we were protecting you, he said quietly. We didn't want to drag you into our problems. I shook my head, unable to comprehend their logic. I'm your daughter, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. I should have been there with you, helping you through those problems. That's what families do. They don't just disappear when things get tough. There was a heavy silence in the room, and I could see the guilt written on their faces. But it didn't make me feel any better. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies or explanations could undo the pain of those 6 years of silence. We are sorry, my mother said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. We never meant to hurt you. We thought we were doing the right thing, but we realize now that we were wrong. We just a broken bar. We didn't know how to come back after all that time had passed. I wanted to forgive them. A part of me longed for reconciliation, for things to go back to the way they were before, but another part of me was still so hurt, so angry. How could I just let them back into my life after everything they had done? I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice trembling. You left me when I needed you the most. You took away my family, and I don't know if I can ever get that back. Tears filled my mother's eyes, and my father looked like he was struggling to keep his emotions in check. We understand, he said softly. We know we can't make up for the time we all lost, but we want to try. We want to make things right, if you'll let us. I sat there for a long time, processing their words. Part of me wanted to walk out the door and never look back, but another part of me, the part that still longed for the family I had lost, wanted to give them a chance. I don't know if things can ever be the same, I said finally, but I'm willing to try. On my terms. They nodded, relief washing over their faces. We still had a long way to go, and I wasn't sure if we could ever fully repair the damage that had been done. But for the first time in 6 years, there was a glimmer of hope, and that was enough for now.